Hello everyone and welcome to the library. It's fantastic to see you all here. Look, first things first, I'd like to start this gathering by recognising that we're getting together on Wurundjeri country and just acknowledge what a privilege it is that we get to do so. So I'd like to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri ancestors and elders, as we always do when we come together here on our Burwood campus. It's great to have you all here marking the last day of the Hostile Terrain 94 exhibition, which I have on good authority is just hours away from getting completed after its 3-week run. So my name's Jackson Mann. I'm the manager of library exhibitions and public programs here at Deakin, and it's my job today to introduce our panel, who will lead this discussion on Hostile Terrain 94 and the global border. I'll just say that at the library we were really proud to partner with the Faculty of Arts and Education to present the Hostile Terrain 94 exhibition as part of the Global Challenges sequence. And I won't talk too much about the exhibition because that's the job of our panellists here. But I will say it's been really inspiring over the last 3 weeks to see our student volunteers painstakingly put together this impressive and confronting visualisation. It's really important, and I'm quite appreciative that through our exhibitions program, the library can give visibility to this important work. I just think of the thousands of students who have been coming in and out of the library each day for the past 3 weeks, and who've stopped to take a moment to take in this exhibition. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from our student volunteers about their experience of immersing themselves in the project, but also some of the conversations that might have happened with those audience members. And we'll hear from them later on during this panel discussion. So today we've got our 3 panellists who are delving into the issues embodied in this exhibition, and I'll introduce them. So we have Dr. Amy Nethery, Senior Lecturer in Politics. Amy's research explores implications of asylum policies in Australia and Asia. An important theme of her work is the analysis of asylum policy according to democratic norms of policymaking, with a particular interest on immigration detention. And we're very excited to be joined by photographer and filmmaker Bharat Ali Batur, whose photos have been exhibited widely internationally. Batur's documentary, Batur, a Refugee Journey, won Best Director at the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival and was nominated for the 2021 Walkley Documentary Award. Amazing. And some of you may have also seen Batur recently speak at the TEDx ITV on the topic of the struggle of identity and belonging. And in addition to his photographic practice, Batur also teaches photojournalism at RMIT University. So I think many of us will be familiar with his work, but if you haven't seen Batur's photos, have a look on his website. And finally, we're joined by Dr. David Border-Giles, Senior Lecturer in Anthropology here at Deakin, and I'm sure everyone here knows the instigator of this exhibition here on our campus. David's research explores urban biopolitics and necropolitics, which in other words is the politics of life and death as it's shaped by governance and the regulation of bodies and their access to the necessities of survival. So 3 very relevant perspectives to what we're talking about today. So thank you all for being here, and I'll hand over to David to run the session. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It's really lovely to have everyone here, and especially it's really lovely to see so many of the hands that were involved in putting this up. So before I rattle on too much, I want to emphasise. I want to emphasise how important it is to have the whole assemblage of humans who are involved in this, or a subset of them in a room together. So what I was hoping we could do with this this space was essentially to share some of the insights that we've gleaned from creating this, from installing it, and then B, to reflect on how that connects to the politics and the implications of the border and migration here in Australia and globally. So there'll be sort of 2 things I want to do. Before I do those 2 things, I should just give you a bit of an orientation to what's actually up here. So very quickly, I'll just tell you what, why, and how, and then we're all on the same page. I think many of you already know this, so I'll be quick. But what it is, Jackson said, it's the Hostile Terrain 94 project. That is a project of the Hostile Terrain 94 exhibit. That is a project of the Undocumented Migration Project, who is a non-profit in the United States that takes social science methods and applies them to making visible the effects of border policy that would otherwise become invisible. So they use, for example, archaeological methods to track, instead of ancient artefacts, to track where and how shoes, backpacks, water bottles and that sort of thing are deposited on the way across the border. So this is a similar project trying to make visible the crossings that people go through. And in this case, it's trying to make visible the crossings that were ended prematurely. So each of these tags represents the location where someone died trying to get into the United States across the desert. There's no fence, there's no very active border control, there's no line in the sand, there's just a great big deadly desert. And the official US policy is called prevention through deterrence. The idea being that the desert is enough of a deterrent. Obviously that's not true. Obviously the US government knows that it's not true because they've tracked all of these deaths. Nonetheless, prevention through deterrence is the official policy and has been since 1994, hence the name Hostile Terrain 1994. So the what is an effort to make visible those deaths and those consequences of American border policy that would otherwise go unseen. And people disappear into the desert, information disappears into the desert. So they describe this project as an act of witnessing, data visualization as an act of witnessing. So that's the what. The why, of course, we're connecting this with, so I'm from anthropology. The person who founded the Undocumented Migration Project is an anthropologist. And so initially we were going to bring this in connection with the anthropology of crime and violence. I'm also directing the Global Challenges sequence and a number of US students in that. And so we've brought this here in connection with that curriculum as well. And it's sort of to just help us think about how the tools and techniques of the arts and humanities can be applied to contemporary issues. So, the border is a contentious issue driven by feeling, ideology, and this is an example of a project that takes the tools of social science, the tools of the arts and humanities, and applies them directly to public discourse about border policy. So that's the what, the why, and actually, in this case, the how might be the most important part. You've heard the phrase, many hands make light work. It hasn't actually been light work, but there have been many, many hands on this. It's been absolutely inspiring. So obviously students from a number of different units have come and helped out, and thank you for that. That's made the bulk of the difference. But also colleagues, also people's parents, also many, many people from the library and just passers-by who've noticed, asked what it's about and sat down to fill out some tags and put them up. So we're closing in on finishing it tonight. So that's the how. Due to the constraints of the space, we haven't done it in exactly the same way that it's been done in many, many of the other locations where this installation's been staged. But I think we've made something particularly interesting of it. Usually, they'll have a couple of massive workshops where they have people fill out the tags. Then they'll have another massive workshop where they install the tags on a wall. And that isn't quite going to work for the kind of concentration of people and space we have at Deakin. So what we did instead was to take 3 weeks to gradually assemble it. And that way, passers-by every day can see new tags go up on the wall in exactly the same way that with every passing year, new bodies are found. So in some way we're trying to sort of bring that home. And then at the end of it, so the act of installing it is the exhibit. And then at the end of it, which is tomorrow, it'll all come down. So we'll finish it tonight. And then like a Tibetan mandala or sand painting, we spend the longest time putting it together. And then when it's put together, whew, it goes. So, Tibetan sand paintings are designed to illustrate impermanence. And in a way, we're also illustrating the impermanence, but the impermanence of the information itself, right? This is all information that could so easily be lost. So we're illustrating its assemblage and becoming visible, and then illustrating its disappearance. So that's as much as I want to say. That's probably a bit more time than I really meant to take up. But what I want to do with the rest of the time is two things. First of all, hear from the volunteers and hear what you've learnt in doing this, what patterns you've noticed, what questions you've raised. And I really think it's important that the volunteers speak first. And then with the rest of the time, the three of us will have a chat and hear questions from the audience. So I have a microphone and I'm going to give it to the people who helped out, who are sitting closest. If you like. Does anyone have... What did you notice or reflect on, or what were you surprised by as you were doing this? Yeah, go for it.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I've been taking part in this exhibition as a first-year art student doing the Global Challenges and Personal Agency subject. So in the process of writing a whole lot of tags, I found myself constantly changing between connecting with the information and disconnecting with the information. Just focusing on the handwriting, writing lots of tags, I really felt the bureaucratic nature of giving every single name or not name a number, and the state that their body was found in. Got really good in my handwriting of writing fully fleshed. And then a piece of information, an age that's around my age, or a way of death that stood out, cause of death that stood out to me, suddenly brought me out of that experience. Like someone who drowned in the middle of the desert when everyone else in that area had died of exposure. Or these two people that were found very close together in latitude and longitude, who both died in a car accident. So, yeah, it was constantly changing and flipping, and really made me think of how we remove ourselves from these individual people's experiences, and all we're left with is a couple of small facts about them, maybe not even their age or name or sex at some point. Some of these have nothing but a number to them. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Feel free
to I'm Andrew Patterson, a fourth-year student here at Deakin, studying arts and education, I guess. I'm from the U.S. I've spent some time in this area. My grandparents live somewhere over here. I'm not really sure. But I was born in '93, and like David said, this has been going on since, well, before '94, but that's when it all started. But I've lived my whole life not understanding, well, not being told and not knowing that this was happening until 3 weeks ago. So it's been, I don't know, I feel like it should be more difficult for me to process and to think about, but it's just another thing that gets put onto the pile of issues you've never heard about that you just learn about. And just filling out names and causes of death and locations and things it was easy. My handwriting's horrible, but I tried my best for them to make it count. But today we were doing one, and there's 63 bodies here in this spot here that I was working on today. And I put one on top that age is 0, and they don't even have a name for her because she wasn't born yet. And it's like, just every now and then you get one tag that you're just like, oh, and it just takes you out of the like rhythm of it, and you got to try and keep focused because there's so much to do, and this probably isn't even all of them. There's just so much more. It just really highlights the importance of doing these kinds of things. One of my friends was talking to me like, why are we doing this? It's like, did you know about this before you saw this? They're like, no. I'm like, then that's why. That's why this is important.
Hi, my name is Vaibhav, and I work here as a library student assistant. So when I saw it for the first time, I was very curious on what's happening, and I asked one of the volunteers what they're doing, and they shared that this and this is happening, and we are doing this. I was like, okay, I would like to contribute to that. And I don't know, but when I was writing through the tags and going through them, I felt like every tag has its own story. Every person has its own story and how they are being untold, because we didn't, and there would be more than what we have recorded, right? And I just go through them and looking at the ages ranging from 0 to old, and how they died and where the bodies were found, and some of them were deteriorated, some of them were fully fleshed, some of them were gunshot wounds. It was actually very confronting, and to see that we are actually privileged, and knowing about them and looking at it, it was pretty confronting. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, I wish more people would know about this and more people would have contributed to this, and I thank everybody else, those who contributed here. But yeah, I wish this stayed for a while so that people can come and see what's happening. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you.
I'm Stephanie. I came and I did this and worked on this with some of my friends from my anthropology class. And I remember that after the first session, we all did it together. We really struggled to find what word to use for our experience. We came out of the library and said, that was interesting, I think. It was very confronting. That's the point of writing out these people's names. I went a bit further when I was writing, and I was also searching up people online. And sometimes you could find I found images of one woman's funeral, and it really hit me to just see all this family was a packed funeral of all these people who were very emotional at her death. And it just, writing out the names, it already makes you realize, oh my God, these are actual people. But it just hit me on another level. And I'd also read previously in other years a bit about this, but it hadn't hit the same. I had read about some people who are very against people being able to come in through here. And so what they would do, they would go and leave. So some people, for example, try to support people who are trying to cross the border, and they go and they leave water bottles so that people are able to get some water while they're there. And so some people countered that, and they started leaving containers of water that they had put different poisons in or different stuff to try to make people see something, think that they're going to have something to help them, and instead just hurt them or kill them even. And I had read about that many years ago, and I was disgusted by it. But it just, I don't know, left my head after I read it. But I was just so sharply reminded about how much emotion is brought by this, that some people are so angry at the idea of someone trying to have a different life that they will take the time out of the day to go purchase those supplies and go leave that there just so someone can't enter the same country that they're in. It was also really emotional to me because I'm half Chilean, so when I was reading through the names, these people, like the names were like, oh, that's the same name as like my uncle, or that's the same name as my friend I used to have in Chile. And I don't know, it just made it much more real in a way that I had never realized. But yeah, it was confronting, but I also had a nice time connecting with different people in my anthropology class and talking to different people and learning about their different experiences. And I'm really glad for this experience. So yeah, thank you.
The other half of what we want to do today is to start thinking about, how this is not just a local specific issue in the United States, how this is something we can all connect to, in our own communities and in our kind of global, these global configurations of power that we're all embedded in various ways. So the three of us will just each have a kind of brief statement where we reflect on how what this makes us think of from our perspective, and then we'll have questions. I'll ask some questions, but if you have questions on your mind, I'd rather hear questions from you than from me. And with that, I'll hand the microphone over to Amy.
Thank you, David. Thank you for those 4 people who spoke, the 4 volunteers. That was immensely powerful. And thank you to David for creating such a powerful thing for our students and our Deakin community. This is really outstanding. I'm a bit emotional, goodness, didn't expect that. All right. Can I get a sense from this room, who has done some international relations? Okay. So one of the first things you'll learn in your international relations class is that borders aren't real. So this line that we see, this black line, is not real. Sometimes borders between states have a particular geographical feature, like that might be a river, or it might be a mountain range, or it might be an ocean. But they're not real. Our nation states aren't real. The borders between them aren't real. But we bring them into existence through bordering practices. Things like when cartographers draw a line on the map, or the people at Google Maps draw a line on the map for us. Or when people at checkpoints require passports to cross from one zone to another. They make a border real through those practices. Or when we stick up fences, or when we put up detention centres. We're creating borders out of nothing, really. We're inventing them. One thing to note, and that what this exhibition really highlights to me, is how violent our bordering practices can be, and how we don't hold back from killing people. That the border is, this invented thing, is more important than people. So the violence takes place in a number of forms, and as David was saying, one of the violence, one of the volunteers mentioned gunshot wounds, people dying of gunshot wounds. Also, the active neglect, which is a term we're increasingly using at our borders, when governments know that people are trying to cross borders and know that they need our help, but choose not to help them in a zone like a desert or indeed in an ocean, which sort of works in the same way as deserts on our borders. So the work that I do on borders, and particularly borders around Australia, I look at the way the violence and the active neglect that occurs in reinforcing the borders of Australia, these practices stretch well into the Asian region. And I've also looked at how organisations like the European Union implement the same bordering practices that stretch way down south into Africa and way east into Eastern Europe and so forth. So not only are these borders made real because of these bordering practices, but they're not just simply lines between states. They're actually thick. Borders are thick. Can you see here? This is a thick border. Our nation states, particularly the wealthy ones that can fund this behaviour at borders, have very, very thick borders. Arguably, Australia's border, when it comes to deterring refugees from Afghanistan, stretches from the edge of Australia's continent right up to the border of Afghanistan, because our bordering practices take place along that whole zone. So this is what this extraordinary exhibition makes me think of. And I'll leave you with one other very basic but I think fundamental idea. When we're thinking about the way that our world is carved up into nation states with these invented borders, it also brings some truth to the idea of the lottery of birth, and that we have absolutely no choice about where we are born, but that makes an entire difference to where we end up in life. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Amazing. I mean, like how you explained, Amy, was so informative and yeah, amazing. Thank you. And thank you very much, David, for putting this together and for inviting me here to speak and to see this amazing exhibition. And I can connect to this installation or exhibition in many ways as someone coming from a background where like borders are extremely real for us and more challenging, which should not be. Like, I think borders needs to be more beautiful. Like, it should portray different civilization, different cultures, different tradition, rather than deterring people or like punishing people on the borders. But as a Hazara myself from Afghanistan, we like considered to be one of the most persecuted ethnic group in the world, not only in Afghanistan. We are the most persecuted group in Afghanistan, but in the world as well. And our generations have been going through migrations and taking refuge and asylum in different parts of the world, and which has brought me up to here now. So I was born as a refugee and then became a refugee again, and to come to here. So the way I can connect to this exhibition, one of the ways is when I became a refugee myself, so I knew that when I decided to come to Australia, I knew of many people who have taken this route to come to Australia since the first rule of Taliban in the late 1990s, and many of those people that I personally knew, or I knew of them, or I know of them, have gone missing en route to Australia, mostly between Indonesia and Australia. And to this date, their families are waiting to hear from them. They're still hoping that they are alive. They are stuck in one of the islands around between Australia and Indonesia, and someday they are taken hostage or they are in detention in those islands, and so they're hoping. Some of their parents, they have been waiting and they died, but no news. But the reality is they have gone. And when I became a refugee myself, and I decided that I'm going that way, I decided to document it. I photographed my journey all the way, which I was not sure that I would be able, but luckily I could document and photograph that journey in order to visualize it. Why it was important for me to visualize it? Because we heard about this route in stories, people talking about it and saying, and also in Australia, wider audience or people in Australia, they heard about news mostly distorted news and distorted information of and mostly numbers and no face attached to those lives who were trying to come to Australia to seek refuge. So that way it kind of painted a very big and negative picture of people who were similar in this situation. You see a lot of tags here. They have gone, they have come here, they have been punished, they have deterred. Just we saw recently that government announced that they will provide or grant permanent protection to 19,000 of people. So they have been here in limbo for over 10 years, most of them, with no family reunion, a lot of difficulties and uncertainties, and still 12,000 of them are in that situation, which they don't know what will happen to them. So those sorts of punishments do exist here. So, and what has happened, so those numbers, when there is no information, no numbers, no face to the stories, then it shapes the policies of cruelty and deterrence. Through my kind of approach, what I was thinking, to put a face to what has been happening, will probably may inform, shape the thinking, or which may then end up or kind of influencing to influence policy or policymakers or decision makers in terms of people when they know more about people and the names behind all these numbers. So that may change the perspective and the thinking and the thoughts or misinformation they have been receiving. For instance, our friend here who said I grew up in this part of America, but I never knew about it until just 3 weeks ago. So that's why I think it's important that these sorts of practices, exhibitions, and especially stories attached to it is widely spread, so that hopefully that can end up into kind of changing policies towards more humane and a better world. And so we won't see one day, I don't know if that would be true, so hopefully that will be 2024 onwards, so this block will be empty, so we won't see any tag. we can hope, but we should work on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those two sets of comments are sort of enough for me. I don't feel like I have much more to add, really. So I might just sort of reflect in a way on what's already been said. And there are a couple of themes that come out to me. So I just want to say a few quick things about representation and grief and the relationship between those two things. And as we've been assembling this phrase keeps occurring to me, which some of you might know already, that the old saying that the map is not the territory. And in a way that saying is supposed to remind us that our representation of a thing is never equal to the thing. And the way we represent it always reduces it, always highlights some things and leaves some things out. So that as we've been doing it, I've been keenly aware of what's left out. A bit of background that is probably worth sharing is that we originally were going to install this 3 years ago. I got the kit from the Undocumented Migration Project, I think at the end of 2019 or beginning of 2020. We were going to do this and then the pandemic hit, so we waited. They gave us 3 boxes of 1,000 tags each, which originally would have been enough. Now it's not enough. So from the get-go, when we started filling these out, we knew that we were going to run out of tags before we ran out of names. So in a very, very real way, the map here is not the territory. Our efforts to represent what's happened on the border are never going to be adequate to capture what's actually happening. And I think we heard some of that in a range of ways from the volunteers and from Amy and Bharat. There's always more going on. There are lives that are not captured here. And so it just brings home to me the impact of how we choose to represent a thing, which map we create, which map we don't create. So here we've created a very different map than you usually see of the border. Usually you just see a thin black line and this is gone. And that's significant. But even here, when we're trying to fill in a different map of the same territory, we're still limited by the access to information we have. This is very bureaucratic information, and as some of you have already said, there are stories left out there. It reminds me very, very much of some of my own research on homelessness, where I've participated in these regular census counts. And these are important things to do. Every year, a group of people are assigned parts of the map of the city. You walk around and you count the number of people sleeping rough, because you need to be able to say how many people there are, how many more people there are than there were last year. That's valuable information. And still you walk around with a clipboard, tick off a box as you walk past someone who's desperately in need of help, and then walk on to the next person, right? So again, the map is not the territory. And why does that feel like a particularly important thing to say now? Because it helps us think about grief and what becomes grievable and what doesn't. So if you're interested, I'm thinking of the political theorist Judith Butler, who has a lot to say about what makes things grievable. Obviously, our politics is full of selective compassion. Some issues motivate certain publics to feel up in arms, and then some issues get no attention at all. But it's more than just compassion, it's about what actually becomes grievable. And what do we grieve? The things that we know are missing. And if it's missing from the map but we don't know they're missing, we can't grieve. So what's been most powerful to me about this installation has actually been the process of making things visible in a group around a table. The conversations that we have around the table are actually the most important part of what we do, because it makes the absence visible. And if it's visible, if the absence is present, then it becomes grievable. So it leads me to ask what kind of maps we create, how we represent the border, and how those representations make life grievable or not. That's as much as I want to say about that. And what's more important is what you want to ask of us, or what you want to say about it. So I have a microphone, and of course I can come up with questions, but I'd rather you come up with questions. So would anyone like to jump in?
It's an incredibly cynical policy, the prevention through deterrence policy. And it began obviously in 1994, and that was a very important time in US-Mexican relations with the introduction of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is now operating under a different name. That free trade agreement did create, my understanding is that it created quite a bit of push factor in Mexico because of the flooding into the Mexican market of heavily subsidised US corn. A lot of Mexican small-time farmers were forced off their land, not being able to sell their corn. And I was wondering if there's been a lot of research on that sort of thing where it has created a big push factor out of Mexico going into the US. And I just also wanted to make the point that, further to your point about having very sort of extensive border areas, that of course not only are borders sort of arbitrary and not real, but they're also movable, and they have changed over time. So if we're looking at this particular exhibition, to me, when I look at that, the border seems very solid. But if we go back sort of to the mid-19th century, it was very different. Much of this area was part of Mexico at the time, and I think that's sort of important to keep in mind as well, that just because it looks like this now, we can imagine how it was then, and we can then imagine if a similar situation where there were both push and pull factors of people trying to cross into the United States, perhaps there's better routes for people to go through this Mexican territory to less arid areas of the US, which with less hostile terrain, they're able to pass through and survive.
Look, just to add, thanks for your insights, and I think that adds to the debate very well. But just to say that, to acknowledge that these free trade agreements that are forged all over the world are always conducted between countries where the power imbalance exists, and so they often do create or exacerbate reasons for people to move. And also to note that we are always very interested in free trade of goods and services, but not necessarily free trade of people, free movement of people. So that's my only comment to that. Yeah. But as for borders moving, absolutely.
So my question was, did you say, I may have missed this, but did you say that this installation is being done in other parts of the world? Is that right? Right. So how many, I was just interested to know how many groups or universities or communities are doing this?
I think this is the only one in Victoria, but it's been around Australia in a few different places, mostly in North America, but both hemispheres, north and south, also both hemispheres, east and west. Yeah. And they're hoping, so we'll collect the tags after it's done and probably send at least some of them back. They're hoping to create a kind of a synthetic, like a synthesis of all the different installations. So they'll have one that lives on somewhere.
Can I just add on to that? I'm really interested to hear about your reflection of yourself as a visual person and how powerful this is for you. I think a lot of people might share that. This is a growing body of activism and research and scholarship as well, this visualisation. So a lot of people are engaged in this sort of counter mapping, it's called. So there are projects that are mapping the boats that sink on the Mediterranean between North Africa and Southern Europe, and lots of other places. In fact, I wonder if I could throw to Batur, you were telling us before we began about the work, the counter-mapping work in Quetta in Pakistan. So this sort of work documenting this sort of thing on the borders is increasingly, people are realising how powerful it is, I think. So would you mind?
Yeah, sure. So when I saw this installation, it reminded me of a work of a friend who has been working to document the terrorist attacks on the Hazaras in Pakistan. So Hazaras, they have a very small population in Pakistan, and they mostly live in Quetta city, which is bordering city to Iran and Pakistan, and they have been under attack for the last 2 decades, and mostly by the state-backed militant organizations, which they have free hand to target, in particular the Hazaras in Quetta. So Hazaras lived in two small ghettos, like enclaves, which were surrounded by military checkposts and mountains. So in between that, probably it is around 5 to 6 kilometers of distance between going from one enclave to the other one. And in between you cross the Quetta city as well. So many attacks have occurred on schools, mostly public transports, at shops, at university, or buses and things. And so what he did was he created a Google map of each incident and collected all the information of how many people have been attacked and how many, who were they, names and things, whatever information he could. So he put that on Google Maps. So when you click on that, then you see all the things, and you would be surprised. So most of the attacks occurred was in between an area which was just maybe hardly a kilometer, and there is a military checkpost as well, and most of the attacks occurred there. So it very much reminded me of that, how we can track those sorts of or document those sorts of incidents or happenings and kind of share it with further and wider world. Though we have probably on papers or in offices or data or archives, so probably that wouldn't be touched. So these sorts of art or online things are very important. Visually, it kind of connects to a wider audience, and people, I think, is more effective.
I was going to ask how you thought about what to document when you were photographing your own transit to Australia. Because thinking about what's left out, I was interested to think about when you were photographing, what was the most important, what were the most important things to photograph, or the most powerful things to photograph?
Okay, so I have had a couple of challenges as well while documenting it, because I was on a very low budget. I had one camera, limited battery and memory space, memory. So I had to be very careful with my shots to what to photograph and what not to photograph. And also leaving from Pakistan to Indonesia and then to eventually trying to reach Australia. So I didn't have any place where I could back up as well. So that's why I had to be very careful. So as a documentary photographer or photojournalist, I was just observant of what was happening in front of my eyes. For instance, mostly people were important who were involved in that, how they are traveling, what sort of places we are being locked up, or how we are getting on a boat to cross Thai border into Malaysia, or how we are put into a car and where we take a break in a forest, when smugglers are doing their drugs, and also in a house where we were locked up with other people while the other more refugees joined. So what were the setup and there were notebooks similar, it kind of that also relates to this, people before us stayed in that house, and they had left notes in the notebooks, even drew pictures of imaginary boats, like not boat, ship, that they are hoping that they will reach safely to Australia, or like notes of like, this is the date, my name is this and that, and like from here, and I'm hoping for a safe trip to Australia, something like that. So those sorts of things were very important. Even like kind of things like a small like food container, which they turned into a charity box. So like they left a dollar note or like cents or like Malaysian ringgits and things like that. So all those sorts of stuff were very important. Also, lives of refugees in Indonesia. When I lived longer in Indonesia while waiting for the boat, and after my boat was sinking and we got back here, so I was documenting the daily lives, like how people live here without any support, like where they don't have any support or uncertainty. Some of them are waiting for phone calls from smugglers, or some of them are in the process of like getting a refugee status or getting resettled to another country. So those sorts of stuff, like I was documenting like how people from Afghanistan, which is not connected to sea, and most of them, they don't know swimming. They have seen a swimming pool like where they are staying for the first time, and they are trying to practice their breath in order to be prepared for a sea journey, a sea voyage, which is unbelievably like kind of risky, and I don't think it would prepare anyone for that. So those sort of stuff, preparing life jackets, and yeah, I think it was just human, whatever was like real, like to depict that and to show it. So the actual journey, how it looks like. Yeah, I don't know, like if I explained it well, but because I can see the images in my mind, so I'm explaining, kind of trying to tell others, but. Those images are available, some of them on my website and also in other videos that I have shared online.
And the website is just www.batua.com, right? Or and Batua has 2 O's, BATOOR.
Hi. My question, basically when we were pinning the notes, something that came up for me was the relationship between borders and human trafficking, and I think that's something I wasn't quite sure about, and David kind of helped to explain how some people saved up their whole lives and paid, to get smuggled in, and I think that's something I kind of wanted to know more about, because to me it seemed like it would be a better idea to, work, say, in Mexico and save that money, to stay in Mexico. But then when you think of like people are willing to spend a crazy amount of money to, take the journey, and I think that's something I really wanted to know about.
Share some of my experiences, because it is a bit of a different than the economical probably migration. So people do spend huge amount of money to pay people smugglers to get some from point A to point B, but often that are because of desperation, risks that involve to their lives or like to the threat they are facing. For instance, like just a very quick, like an example. In my documentary film, I set a story of a family of Hazara in Quetta. So that family went through 4 terrorist attacks, 1 bomb blast, 3 targeted attacks. So the dad, who was a vegetable seller, once he survived, he got only injured when terrorists stopped the public bus and identified the Hazaras and opened fire on them and killed several, and he survived underneath dead body, the first. Second time, again, there was another attack, and he narrowly escapes a incident outside of the, inside the market, vegetable market, which he travels every day to make a living for his family. The third time, his convoy is attacked and he dies. So, and the fourth time, the children who were still underage, the minors, the sister and brother, they get injured in bomb blast. So I mean, they are the situation in which they try to flee, but they come from the countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan that the passports of those countries, you can't get visa even for your neighboring country. It's extremely hard, extremely hard. So the only option is left there. Left there is people smugglers, where you can get help with. So a lot of people a lot of time in desperation, those people who do not even have money, so they try to borrow from people. They sell their belongings, they sell their earnings, savings, everything, to get to safety. So they are the situations, some of the situations in terms of those who are seeking asylum or refuge in different countries, knowing that how risky the journey ahead is. So this one is more risky, he is very uncertain, but with the hope that they might get to a safety, so they will be able to help their family members as well, which was my case as well. So I knew the challenges and the threats or the risks of the journey that I took myself. I decided to go, but the danger behind were probably greater than the traveling with people smugglers. But it is a very big business, and people get advantage of those refugees and people seeking asylum on this route.
I wonder if I can just add just a very quick extra thought on that, which is that even though there are obviously massive differences between someone you might call an economic refugee in the sense that they're seeking economic refuge, economic security, even though there might be massive differences between circumstances between someone who might be an economic refugee from Mexico and someone who might be a political refugee fleeing persecution. What both of those situations have in common is the border, is that there's an institution called a border which segregates economic or political security in one place. And so in that sense, it might seem, if there's a parallel to draw, it might be the question of how the border makes the risk and the cost seem worthwhile.
This is kind of a quick one. I'm just wondering, what was the situation like before 1994? So what is this replacing?
I think it harkens back to a couple of the points made before about the kind of symbiotic systemic relationship between the Mexican and United Statesian economies, that they function in some ways as a joint system. So in the 1950s, there was a form of legal labour trafficking that recruited people from rural Mexico to come to the United States to work in the agricultural sector. So right up until sort of the 70s, the 80s, that was an ongoing regular thing. For political reasons, from Reagan on, it became the border controls became more strict, and that this is not my realm of expertise. But what is interesting is the way the political rhetoric has shifted. So someone like Ronald Reagan would be seen now as quite extremely left-wing, because he was advocating for amnesty for Mexican migrants who had crossed over without documentation. Because of course it's good for business to have a steady flow of labour, and especially a steady flow of labourers who will work for less, to put it bluntly. So in the 1980s, it was a set of Republican talking points that, and even when George Bush II, I use the monarchic appellation deliberately. When George Bush II was elected, he was initially, he's from Texas, from a border state. He was very much an advocate for some kinds of decriminalisation, but it's become mostly a Republican talking point, but the Democrats have also taken it up too. So 1994 would have been when Bill Clinton was president, and the Democratic Party, in a similar way to in Australia, the way the Labor Party adopted talking points from their opposition, Bill Clinton adopted this kind of zero tolerance policy rhetoric from the Republicans as an electoral strategy. So there's been a gradual shift in the electoral rhetoric since then, and that's as much as I can say, but that kind of, I think, maps out a broad trajectory anyway. I would like to thank you all for coming and like to invite you all, if you'd be interested, to stick around for a bit to help us finish this off before the end of the day. Remember, this is a bit like a mandala and it's all going to come down tomorrow. So I am not less but more committed to finishing it by the end of the day for that reason. So please do stick around, and also please feel free to photograph it, chuck it up on social media, and if you do, tag Hostel Train 94 and Deakin Arts and Ed, Deakin Libraries, because of course the whole point is to make visible what previously might not have been seen. And it's all publicly available information, so there's nothing too sensitive to go on social media. So please do photograph it, throw it up, tag it, and also check out Batua's website. And thank you very much.